Hi, everybody. I am Dr. Chris Hoff, and it's time for another table talk. And today we're talking about rebels without a clue or reactance theory. It's going to be a anti-vax, anti-mask talk. But before we get there, I wanted to point out my new cup that I got from the wonderful therapist, Katrina Sevilla. Thank you, Katrina, for this birthday present. Very much appreciated. Radical Therapist Table Talk. Yesterday, I saw some news about another anti-masker dying of COVID. The last couple months, there's been a steady stream of these types of stories as the Delta variant continues to ravage the unvaccinated. Nearly all COVID deaths are now deaths of the unvaccinated. And with all of these hard facts, people are still fighting for the right to die or the right to speed others to their death. Why is this? Well, I just recently learned about reactance theory. And reactance theory is a potential construct, a way of maybe looking at what's actually going on here. Reactance theory is a model stating that in response to a perceived threat to or loss of behavioral freedom, a person will experience psychological reactance, or more simply reactance, a motivational state characterized by distress, anxiety, resistance, and the desire to restore freedom. I mean, look at any video from an airplane or airport these days, you'll see that going on. According to this model, when people feel coerced into a certain behavior, they will react against that coercion, often by demonstrating an increased preference for the behavior that is restrained and may perform the behavior opposite of that desired. Here's a pic of me as a young punk rocker. These were the days. If you said go right, I went left. If you said white, I said black. And the worst feeling I could experience was the feeling of powerlessness. Highly reactant individuals are characterized by a resistance to rules and regulations, a high desire for autonomy, high defensiveness, and low concern for social norms. This probably explains why many of my old punk rock friends are heavily weighted in the anti-mask camp. You know who you are. So what can we do? Well, I see a lot of folks these days trying to change minds via consistent social media posts, sharing the data, even name calling, but none of this will work under the reactance psychology construct. The research shows that in the context of persuasive messaging, individuals exhibiting high trait reactance experience greater freedom threats and therefore are more resistant to persuasive attempts to change their minds. So all those Instagram posts, they are doing nothing. And it could be argued that it's only having them dig in deeper. Wittgenstein said, "The limits of language are the limits of my world." So the language we use in efforts of persuasion are very important when in conversation with someone under the influence of reactance psychology. Freedom-threatening language is a no-go. Phrases such as "you must," "it is impossible to deny," and "stop the denial" will only create more defensiveness. What has been shown to be effective is implicit, autonomy-supporting, and choice-enhancing language. This looks like using qualifiers such as perhaps, possibly, and maybe, which are thought to be more successful at achieving desired persuasive outcomes as they more successfully avoid the perception of you trying to control anyone's behavior. Restoration postscripts have also been shown to be quite effective. What's a restoration postscript? Restoration postscripts are language at the end of messaging like, the choice is yours, you are free to decide for yourself, etc., etc. Narratives have also been shown to be important. What does this mean? Well, rather than telling people what to do, like using didactic styles of communicating that present propositions in the form of reason or evidence supporting a claim, it is more effective to tell personal stories of your own or others with hopes for changed behavior implicit in the story. And finally, as I recently learned in Adam Grant's great book, Think Again, we need to ask better questions. What are these questions we can ask? Well, we can ask questions, how questions, rather than why questions. When we ask folks how they would make their views a reality, they often realize the limits of their understanding and start to temper some of their opinions. We can ask, what evidence would change your mind? This is a great question. Grant says it's more effective to inquire what would open their minds and then see if you can convince them on their own terms. And finally, we can ask how people originally formed their opinion. Many of our opinions, like our stereotypes, are arbitrary. We've developed them without rigorous data or deep reflection. This sort of question can make that visible. Listen, setting aside the reactance construct, whatever you think about that, all of this can also be argued that it's just toxic individualism that has continued to gain ground over time for a myriad of reasons. Without the label, I'm sure if you ask any parent, they are quite familiar with reactance theory. And I suppose it could be argued that we are actually in a pandemic of childishness. But current efforts to win hearts and minds is not working. Time for some new strategies. I encourage you to play with the language you use in your efforts of persuasion. See what happens. It's a matter of life and death. Thanks for watching. I'm Dr. Chris Hoff. This has been the Radical Therapist Table Talk. Peace.